This series contains real stories from a poisoning outbreak, told from the perspective of an investigation unfolding in real time as we search for clues and answers. It includes severe illness and death. Some moments may be difficult to hear. The views and opinions expressed on this series represent the people speaking them, and not any organization they are affiliated with. This podcast discusses medical and food safety topics, but it is for education and storytelling only. It is not medical advice and makes no claims about the safety of any food. If you are concerned about a possible poisoning or the safety of any food, contact your local poison center for free personalized medical advice. In the U.S., that number is 1-800-222-1222.
6 people are now dead. Authorities say poisoned Tylenol capsules reached store shelves.
Dozens became ill after drinking coffee investigators believe was deliberately poisoned.
Health officials are tracking a cluster of lead poisonings linked to a popular fruit pouch sold for children. Investigators suggest the contamination may have been intentional.
A train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed overnight, forcing thousands from their homes.
Officials believe a toxic ingredient may be behind illnesses at a restaurant. Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food. Experts say even a tiny amount can be fatal.
Several deaths are now being reviewed.
More than 50 people have reported symptoms. State health officials are now working to find the source.
The company is offering a $100,000 reward for information on who may have added the poison.
Authorities are calling it a poisoning.
A mass poisoning.
Another outbreak.
A poisoning outbreak.
An outbreak.
An outbreak.
An outbreak.
A mass poisoning outbreak.
Welcome back to A Morel Dilemma. It's Tuesday, April 18th, 2023. A number of people have become ill, and at least one person has experienced a cardiac arrest. And at the center of it all is a downtown Bozeman sushi restaurant. What started as a routine meal is now a public health nightmare, and one with a lot of loose and potentially dangerous ends. We don't know what the cause of all this illness is yet, but early investigation is pointing towards a historically well-known delicacy, the morel mushroom. So who steps in to get to the bottom of what caused this outbreak, and more importantly, to keep it contained before anyone else gets sick? Do you remember when you first got called?
It was a Tuesday. I had a day to catch up on some stuff, and then I got the call from Heather and was like, I don't know if it's going to be that kind of day anymore.
That's Rachel Hinnenkamp, the state foodborne epidemiologist from Montana.
I'm Rachel Hinnenkamp. I am the foodborne disease epidemiologist with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services.
And the Heather who called her is Heather Demarest.
My name is Heather Demarest. I'm from Bozeman, Montana. I was one of the lead local investigators. I work at the Gallatin City County Health Department as a communicable disease specialist.
Have you ever heard of cholera? It's a diarrheal illness caused by a bacteria. And in 1854, about 600 people in one small neighborhood in London died from it. And many more would have died if it weren't for the efforts of one physician, Dr. John Snow. He meticulously mapped where all of the people who died lived and interviewed people who became sick. He found that almost everyone who developed cholera was getting their water from a single water pump, known as the Broad Street Pump. Now, this was before germ theory had even been established, and everyone believed that cholera was spread via the air. However, using this data, Dr. Snow convinced authorities to remove the handle from the Broad Street water pump, and the cholera outbreak was over. Dr. Snow's meticulous approach to disease mapping and data analysis earned him the name the father of public health. And if John Snow is the founder of public health, Rachel and Heather are his disciples. Quite literally, each of them has a public health master's and studied the tenets of disease tracking, tracing, and analysis.
Heather and I both have experience investigating outbreaks. I've been the foodborne disease epidemiologist with the state of Montana for going on 7 years.
After meeting them, it would not surprise me to see a map of the water pumps by John Snow hanging in their office. They are really into this stuff. And that's good, because these are the people who work at your local and state health departments. investigating outbreaks. Heather was the boots on the ground in this outbreak, interviewing patients, tracking and tracing exposures, trying to figure out exactly what is going on in Bozeman.
So we kind of received simultaneous reports, interestingly, but the hospital was the first one, at least, that notified the communicable disease side where I work. We have a main line that providers know to contact. So they called our main line and looped us in right away of an individual who was hospitalized after consuming food at a sushi restaurant.
That was the hospital reporting Donna from the previous episode.
Typically with foodborne illnesses, we don't see such severe outcomes. So I made sure to notify Rachel up at the state immediately as well and see if there were reports of illnesses in other jurisdictions happening.
At that time, Heather notified me about the one case. I made note of it. A few hours later that same day, I got a call from a local public health nurse in a county that was neighboring Gallatin County. And she let me know that they had a resident of that county who was very sadly found deceased in his home earlier that morning, and that the previous day he had eaten at the same restaurant as the one that Heather mentioned and experienced a very rapid onset of gastrointestinal symptoms after that meal.
Yet another cardiac arrest with symptoms matching those of the other severe cases. This is deeply concerning because at this point in the outbreak, we have no idea how many others could be impacted.
So after I had that conversation, I immediately called Heather back, let her know that we had another associated case with the same restaurant on the same day. And that really kind of triggered our full outbreak investigation.
So prior to that, we had started our inspection at the facility because when we were first had that hospitalized patient reported to us, we were like, okay, we need to go see what's going on at the establishment, if there are any major red flags or anything like that. So when Rachel notified me of this second case with severe outcomes, it became apparent that some really concerning things were happening, and we also issued a health officer order for them to remain closed as we continued to investigate the outbreak.
So you were already in the restaurant after the first case, and then hours later, you're hearing another person has died. This is escalating very fast. Were you concerned?
It was very concerning early on. We certainly hadn't seen anything quite like this, especially with those severe outcomes right away and us not having a clear pathogen or source.
At this point, reports were coming in from multiple directions. People getting very sick fast. So the health department acted. They shut the restaurant down to stop any further exposures. The same principle is pulling the handle off the Broad Street pump. Control the outbreak first and figure it out second. So for now, the public is safe. But what's actually causing this? That is a much harder question. However, even this early, one signal is starting to emerge. You already know what it is.
At that point, the two cases that we'd been notified of, we knew that they had both consumed this special sushi roll, and the only unique ingredient to that roll was the morel mushrooms.
The salmon was part of the special roll. It was not high on our suspicion list because it was also served in other rolls that we were not finding an association with illness in people. But for due diligence, we decided to perform some testing on it.
So that's why we collected those food specimens in particular.
A lot of our other foodborne disease outbreak investigations, whether it's Salmonella or E. coli, we will often see trends in the food vehicle. But this was also a interesting outbreak because the vehicle of exposure, the morel mushroom, had not previously been identified as a known common cause of gastrointestinal illness.
So the investigation is underway, but we also have patients like Donna in the hospital who need treatment, and we don't know what the poison is. So how do the doctors treat people without a clear idea of what's poisoning them?
So the same day that we learned about the outbreak, I notified the Rocky Mountain Poison Control Center to let them know what we were seeing. Interestingly, the clinician who saw our first hospitalized case also looped in the Rocky Mountain Poison Control Center. So they had heard about this from a couple different sources.
Ah, the Poison Center. This is where I usually come in these types of outbreaks, as part of a team that gets called when a strange symptom shows up. We help hospitals figure out what toxins might be involved and how to treat patients even when the diagnosis isn't clear yet. Now, you remember what Rachel said.
The morel mushroom had not previously been identified as a known common cause of gastrointestinal illness.
I keep honestly asking myself, had I been on the team getting the call about this outbreak, would I have ever landed on the morel mushroom? Even if they were adamant that this was the only thing everybody ate, I would want to rule out all of the things we talked about in the first episode: bacteria, chemical contaminants, or a different deadly mushroom getting mixed in. I think it's time to bring in some outside perspective to see if this was as surprising to anyone else. And I know exactly who to call.
Rob Bassett. I'm an emergency physician and a medical toxicologist, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Medical Director for Philadelphia Poison Control at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
I'm Anthony Jaworski, and I am a clinical pharmacist and a clinical toxicologist.
Dr. Bassett and Dr. Jaworski run a poison center in a very special place.
Mushroom capital of the world. It's not for the reasons you think. It actually refers to Kenneth Square, which is a town in southeast Pennsylvania. And the reason why it's called the mushroom capital of the world is that almost half of mushrooms sold in the United States all come from there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's...
Now, Dr. Bassett and Dr. Jaworski were not involved in this Bozeman, Montana outbreak, but they've had their fair share of mushroom poisoning outbreaks in Pennsylvania.
We've been involved in multiple mushroom outbreaks. You know, the late summer, early fall tends to be mushroom exposure seasons.
And I've read some headlines. 11 people hospitalized in Pennsylvania after eating toxic mushrooms in October of 2024.
Yeah, that made some media headlines. I think CNN and, some pretty big news outlets, Lancaster County, I think.
I gave Dr. Bassett the scenario. Dozens of people experiencing rapid onset nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea immediately after eating at a sushi restaurant, and some with such severe symptoms that cardiac arrests have been reported.
I will say, hearing that story, if you said, I've got somebody with GI distress, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea in the hospital, despite the fact that we're on a mushroom discussion, that is lowest on my list. So I think what I would say is, gosh, there's so many food toxins, everything from Shiga to Salmonella to E. coli, that would be higher up on my list than mushroom toxicity.
For Dr. Bassett as well, bacterial food poisoning is still the leading suspect and has been for pretty much everyone I've talked to. So if we're going to move this investigation forward, we have to rule this out. So I think it's time we hear what Heather and Rachel found to see if we can scratch this suspect off our list.
So testing is a big part of foodborne outbreak investigations in general.
That's Rachel Hinnenkamp again, the state foodborne epidemiologist.
Throughout that time, we were working very closely with our laboratory partners to coordinate both clinical and food testing. We worked with sick individuals and collected stool samples, urine samples, and sent those to our state public health laboratory for testing. Things that we were testing for included B. cereus, C. perfringens, Staph aureus. Again, nothing came back positive. We also collected morel mushroom and salmon specimens that we sent off for testing through the Montana Public Health Lab. Those came back negative on both samples as well.
That's one major suspect off the table. They tested the patients. They tested the food. They looked for all the usual bacterial culprits we talked about back in episode 1. And they found nothing. Now, that doesn't mean it's the mushroom. But right now, it's the only signal I actually have. So I think I have to start taking it a lot more seriously. And to do that, well, I guess there's some important questions I need to answer about mushroom poisoning. And the first question is, are there even mushrooms that cause the symptoms we saw in this outbreak? To figure that out, I brought Matt back. You've helped care for some pretty sick mushroom poisonings.
Yeah.
How often do you actually have a mushroom in front of you?
I don't always say never, but usually never.
Almost never, right? I mean, they're coming to the emergency department because they ate the mushroom. So how do we identify what poisonous mushroom someone ate, or at least get an idea of what we think they ate?
We use something called the toxidrome, which is basically just a pattern of symptoms that a toxin produces based on what we know of its mechanism.
Right. So luckily, many mushrooms produce a pretty specific pattern of symptom. Can any mushrooms produce the kind of symptoms that Owella had?
Generally, what I just classify as gastroenteritis mushrooms. Jack-o'-lanterns, earth balls are the ones that usually come to mind.
Yeah, those are pretty common ones. Another is the green-spored parasol. That's actually the most common mushroom poisoning in the U.S., and it causes abrupt onset nausea and vomiting. We usually group all of these different mushrooms under a class called gastrointestinal irritant mushrooms. It's a really broad term we use to describe hundreds of different mushrooms that all cause upset tummy.
Yes, any mushroom that can cause gastroenteritis.
The key point is these aren't really deadly. They just kind of ruin your day, like what happened to Owella.
Correct.
So if one of these mushrooms were a player in this outbreak, the deaths would certainly be unusual. But there are other mushrooms that might match. The very severe cases in this outbreak, Matt, had nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, followed by cardiac arrest.
Jeez.
What does it sound like to you?
Muscarine.
Muscarine, right? Muscarine is a toxin found in only a few types of mushrooms. We often call them sweater mushrooms because they do exactly that. They cause sweating, drooling, vomiting and diarrhea, and in severe cases, fluid filling the lungs and the heart slowing to a stop. And I asked Matt about this because he's actually published a case of a fatal muscarine mushroom poisoning that sounds an awful lot like the severe cases in this outbreak.
A case report I wrote up many years ago on clitosabi mushroom death. It was an elderly female in her 80s. She ate these mushrooms that were picked from her yard. Within an hour, she was sweating and she had nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. She developed respiratory problems and fluid in her lungs, progressively depressed mental status, and she ended up dying within 7 hours of after her ingestion. Then on autopsy, there were some partially digested mushrooms in her stomach that were identified by the mycologist as clitosabi.
Clitosabi is a mushroom that contains the toxin muscarine. And on paper, this poison fits the outbreak surprisingly well. Rapid gastric symptoms, and in some cases, the heart stopping. So now we've got two suspects, the rapid onset gastric irritants and the muscarine mushrooms. But there's one major problem. Do any of these look anything like a morel mushroom?
Absolutely not. Even I could tell the difference between them.
So that's a no. Morels have a very clear shape. If you're listening to this series and you don't know what a morel looks like, I think it's time to look one up. Morels are pretty distinctive. They have these pits and ridges on the cap, almost like a honeycomb. They're what's called an ascomycete, which means a cup fungus. And if you really look at one, it's like a bunch of little misshapen cups fused together. It's not something you easily confuse with your typical mushroom. So Matt and I are on the same page. The morel wouldn't be on our radar. And the mushrooms that do match these symptoms look nothing like it. There's no way they'd get mixed up. At this point, I'm struggling to make a mushroom fit this outbreak. But Matt and I trained together. Maybe we're just missing something. So I ran it by Dr. Bassett and Dr. Jaworski, the toxicologists at the mushroom capital of the world, to see if they think there's a mushroom that might tie this all together. Do you remember having dealt with any mushroom poisonings?
Oh, all too well. Psychologically, I'm finally in a state where I can talk about it, but yes.
Yeah, it's an outbreak that happens a little bit too often. Maybe a family who was out in the field foraging mushrooms and bringing that home and cooking something for dinner and ending up with a pretty serious poisoning event.
When you hear about a mushroom exposure, what are the classes of mushrooms that kind of make you nervous?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we talk about toxic mushrooms, it really runs the gamut of relatively mild toxins causing bad vomiting and diarrhea, all the way to the other extreme, or organ failure, like liver failure or death. The things that get my attention is if I think it's going to be one of those ones that could be life-threatening or organ-threatening, like a liver toxic mushroom.
Do you mind just giving some examples of different types of mushrooms with toxins in them?
So I will say I have a vested interest in teaching about all things toxicological. So forgive me if I start to geek out a little bit about, way to learn these things. But one of the most famous toxicologists in the Philadelphia area, Rich Hamilton, published a mnemonic for remembering toxic mushrooms called Gotta Pick 'em. How clever is that? Yeah.
As a gigantic poisoning nerd, I think that's actually really clever. But it's not even the most clever piece. The mnemonic organizes mushrooms by how quickly symptoms start. And that turns out to be one of the most important clues we have when someone comes in with a possible mushroom poisoning. The timing helps us figure out if the mushroom is dangerous or deadly. I'll let Dr. Bassett explain.
In general, the age-old teaching is if you start to develop symptoms very quickly, it's usually inversely proportional to the toxicity. In other words, the least worrisome are the ones that start to show symptoms the quickest. Time of onset of symptoms is really the linchpin in how we decide which ones are the most life-threatening.
This is one of the first rules you learn in, mushroom toxicology. The faster the symptoms, the less you worry about someone dying. So when I hear about an outbreak with rapid gastric symptoms, like the one in Bozeman, well, I expect it to play out like the other mushroom outbreaks that have rapid gastric symptoms. Here's CBS Philadelphia's Liz Crawford.
A fire company in central Pennsylvania says so-called toxic mushrooms made about a dozen people sick last week. According to the CBS affiliate in Harrisburg, all 11 patients were members of an Amish family. They found the wild mushrooms in the woods and ate them for dinner before everybody became sick. Fortunately, all of those involved were treated and released from the hospital.
Everyone gets sick and everyone goes home. That's what makes this outbreak so strange. People got sick almost immediately, and some of them died. It's not how this is supposed to work.
Somebody consumes a mushroom and they start to get vomiting and diarrhea very quickly within 6 hours. That's usually reassuring, as opposed to somebody who's fine or for an extended period of time and then develops symptoms after 6 hours. Those are the ones we get really concerned about because mechanistically, the ones that are implicated are the most toxic mushrooms.
Although Dr. Bassett brought up a really interesting point.
Can I just raise the disclaimer flag really quick too? If it starts late, that's very ominous. If it starts early, don't be too falsely reassured. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention not only are there a couple mushrooms that can start early in terms of their symptoms and actually be toxic, but when people bring in a bag of mushrooms, the only thing I know for sure is the ones in the bag are the ones they didn't eat. And who knows, what they did eat.
Maybe I've been too focused on one mushroom being the problem. Sure, there could have been morels in there, which cause early nausea if they're not cooked well. But maybe there was another, more deadly mushroom mixed in the batch. I mean, there are plenty of potentially deadly mushrooms out there. And Dr. Bassett walks me through each one of them using that Gotta Pick 'em mnemonic.
So G is for Gyrometra, or Gyrometra esculenta. It depletes an important cofactor and it can lead to seizures.
There's ones that affect your kidneys.
O for arelanine, toxin that's associated with Cortinaria species.
Some that hit your muscles.
T, Tricholoma equestrae, causes muscle breakdown.
Others that cause liver and kidney failure together.
The granddaddy of them all, amatoxins, from the Amanita species and the Galerina species. And the ones who do die are usually from amatoxin.
We really left no stone unturned.
Psilocybin or psilocycoprine species. Bacillus. M is for muscarine, Amanita muscaria, the Mario Brothers mushroom of infamy. And that's Gotta Pick 'em in a nutshell.
Dr. Bassett walked us through 12 different poisons produced by just a few hundred mushrooms. But it's basically every toxic mushroom that exists. I asked Dr. Bassett if he thought any of these could have been the cause of the outbreak in Montana, or what he'd think if they told him it was a morel mushroom in the outbreak. So a few hours after they contact you, they tell you they believe it's a morel mushroom. I mean, morel mushrooms aren't in the Gotta Pick 'em mnemonic. Does that surprise you?
It kind of does, because I think, there is a poisonous mushroom that is often mistaken for morel, and it's so common that we've given it a name, the false morel, and that's the gyrometrin species.
I feel like I'd go back to the drawing board and say, hey, what could we be missing here? Maybe it's a false alarm, a false morel.
The false morel. The answer to the second question we need to ask if we want to take mushrooms seriously in this outbreak. Is there a poisonous mushroom that looks enough like the morel to get mixed in? And as it so happens, the false morel is a poisonous mushroom that has killed people and looks so much like the morel. Well, you heard its name. There's not a single toxicologist I've talked to that didn't think that this may have been the cause of the outbreak. In fact, let me get Matt back here.
Yeah, well, I mean, reading this report, that was my gut reaction. Did false morels end up in there?
Right, like a mushroom mix-up. And it turns out the doctors taking care of Donna Ventura were pretty worried about that too.
Pretty early on in the process, it became a question of what about the mushrooms? There was a lot of debate. Were these mushrooms provided by a recognized supplier, or were they brought in by a local mushroom hunter? And is it possible that these were not true morels, but false morels? Mm-hmm. And unless you're a mushroom expert, true morels and false morels look a lot alike.
Where did the restaurant get the morels in the first place? If they came from a forager, maybe some false morels got mixed in.
Yeah, you have to think about the false morel. And I don't know how they cook mushrooms at restaurants in mass quantities. They have a big Blackstone type grill, I'm assuming. If you're batching a bunch of morels, could a false morel or a couple false morels have gotten in there? Can some of that toxin seep into morels?
Right? There are any number of ways it could have happened. The FDA actually published a survey in the 90s showing that 21% of imported morel samples contained contamination with false morel species. That feels like a way more plausible explanation than a mushroom we've always considered edible suddenly becoming deadly. But that brings up a third question we need to take very seriously. Hey everybody, Ryan with a quick interruption. This series only exists because of listeners like you. There are no sponsors, institutions, or billionaires quietly bankrolling this in the background. Just a lot of time, research, and production to bring these stories to life. And there are real costs that come with that. Editing software, sound design, website hosting, podcast hosting, advertising to get the word out, and a lot more. So if you're finding value in it, there are a few ways you can support the show. The first is to go to thepoisonlab.com/support and become a supporting member for as little as $1 a month. And for that, you are going to get access to every single episode ad-free and access to amazing bonus content. You get access to all of that by becoming a supporting member. But if you want to support the show and get something a little more tangible in return, there are 2 educational projects I've built alongside this series you should check out. The first is Poisonous Fungus Among Us. This is a short, simple, rhyming book about mushroom foraging safety. It's built for kids, families, curious foragers. It's a 7-minute read. It uses real, beautiful photographs of poisonous mushrooms and delivers scientifically accurate information in a way that rhymes. You can find it on Amazon by searching Poisonous Fungus Among Us, and it's also free on Kindle Unlimited. The second project is called Gotta Pick 'em. It is a poisonous mushroom card game designed by toxicologists who treat mushroom poisoning. It's a simple, fast-paced card game, but underneath it, you're learning how different mushroom poisons work, what organs they impact, the basics about their anatomy, antidotes we use for them, and you actually don't need to know anything about mushrooms to play. You can find out way more about it at gottapickem.com, which is the companion blog that will teach you not only how to play, but a lot more about poisonous mushrooms. So, if you want to support independent public health storytelling like this, you can find links to all of those options in the show notes. But you don't have to pay anything to support the show. Just being here or sharing this with someone who might learn from it goes a long way. So thank you for listening. Let's get back to the show. We already talked about mushrooms that seem to fit the symptoms from this outbreak. We didn't bring up the false morel. So, is it possible that false morels can cause this toxicity? And I have some really interesting information about that. But let's start with what kind of symptoms we'd expect from these. Dr. Bassett actually gave us a little primer on this mushroom already. It was the first letter of the Gotta Pick'em mnemonic.
So G is for Gyrometra, or Gyrometra esculenta, which is also the false morel. It depletes an important cofactor and it can lead to seizures.
So that's a 1,000-foot overview. And false morels are going to feature, I think, pretty prominently throughout this series. Matt, can you take us a little bit deeper so we can really understand what we're seeing?
Yeah, so false morels contain a chemical called gyrometrin. It's in a class of hydrazines. It gets broken down in the body to what we describe as rocket fuel.
This is rocket fuel. This is monomethyl hydrazine, what they use in NASA to send rockets to the moon. So this is kind of a crazy poison.
Yeah, and it can cause nausea, vomiting, liver injury, and it has significant effects in the brain.
Tell me what it does on the brain.
So GABA is one of our major inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain, meaning it helps calm things down.
People might recognize that neurotransmitter because it's the same one that alcohol works on in the brain.
Yes, alcohol. But gyrometrin essentially disrupts GABA, and that could lead to seizures.
Yeah, it disrupts GABA by stopping you from making it. And when you can't make GABA, all of its building blocks start to accumulate in the brain. And those building blocks are actually your excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate. So not only can you not make the neurotransmitter that turns the brain down, but you're left with only the neurotransmitter that gets the brain overexcited.
Which you can describe as like an all gas, no brake situation. Basically depletes GABA from your brain and eventually seizures.
All gas, no brakes. I like that. So based on that toxin and what it does in the body, what are the classic symptoms I would expect from a false morel?
You eat it, then 4 or 6 hours later, your body converts gyrometrin into this rocket fuel, monomethyl hydrazine. You develop nausea, vomiting, liver injury, and seizures.
Right. That's the classic teaching. So in Owella's case, and in the CDC report, which you read, when did the nausea start?
Over half the cases within an hour.
Way too fast to be a false morel.
Yeah.
And this isn't controversial. For reference, I've got a chapter right here from Gyrometrin Mushroom Toxicity, 2024. The first line says symptoms start 5 to 12 hours after ingestion. And we also didn't see any seizures that we would expect. So if the most likely mushroom mix-up is a false morel, do any of these symptoms actually fit the false morel?
No, absolutely not.
None of this fits. At least that's what I thought. So I'm going to play a little clip for you, Matt. And it's something that really opened up my eyes a little bit. Maybe it will for you. I talked to Dr. Varun Vora, who is a toxicologist in Michigan and deals with a lot of false morel poisoning. I'm going to play that clip now.
Varun Vora, a senior director with the Michigan Poison and Drug Information Center at the Wayne State University School of Medicine, clinical toxicology consultant with the Poison Center and the Toxicology Division, also an associate professor with the Department of Emergency Medicine.
Dr. Vora has probably dealt with more false morel poisoning than almost anyone in the country. For some reason, Michigan is a hotspot for false morel poisoning. So they compiled all their cases and did a study.
Yeah, so basically it was a 19-year longitudinal assessment of gyrometrin-containing mushroom poisonings that occurred in Michigan. We had 118 cases that were reported.
And the findings from Dr. Vora's studies are pretty interesting because they sort of fly in the face of the traditional teaching about the false morel toxidrome, the one that I learned and Matt learned, and that you can find written in texts. So what exactly did you see in terms of toxicity from the false morel?
So out of the 118 patients we analyzed, there were just over 80 that were actually symptomatic. 50% of those cases were just isolated GI toxicity.
The traditional teaching is false morels cause seizures.
Neurotoxicity, like you mentioned, right? Either specifically, seizures. There were no seizures. There aren't traditional neurologic toxicity in the sense of how toxicologists typically think about it in terms of, like you mentioned, seizure activity. The neurological toxicity that were reported typically were more obviously benign symptoms like headache, dizziness, etc.
In the largest data set of false Morel poisonings ever assembled, there were 0 seizures.
Wow. That blows my mind.
Right? I mean, originally, I thought this can't be the false Morel because there are no seizures, but it turns out almost nobody has seizures in real clinical practice. I mean, there's some case reports out there, but that's probably the extreme and not the normal. And most cases just had nausea and vomiting, just like the outbreak we're dealing with right now.
True, but the timing of the nausea and vomiting is still off.
Yeah, right, because you need to break down gyromitrin to make monomethylhydrazine and then get nausea. So I thought that too. This seems like that nausea is too early in this outbreak to be the false Morel, but turns out Dr. Vora's data might refute that too. The toxidrome for a false Morel has traditionally been discussed as nausea and vomiting occurring a little bit later. Is that consistent with what you saw?
It was interesting. It was kind of a mix in terms of there were cases where there was relatively rapid onset within 30 minutes, within an hour, but then there were other cases where I would put it safely between the 4 to 12 hour mark. That I would say is predominant, but there were certainly cases.
He had false Morel patients with nausea and vomiting within an hour. Not all of them, but in Bozeman, only half the patients had nausea and vomiting within an hour. The rest developed symptoms after that.
Wow.
I mean, I thought we could rule out the false Morel based off the toxidrome, but once you actually drill into the data, it's really not as reliable as we think.
It surprises me, and it also doesn't surprise me, thinking about just medicine in general and how what you learn at one point in your training isn't really based on, sound data or analysis.
Yeah. I'm especially realizing that with mushrooms, I think. A lot of what we think we know comes from historical knowledge of what people thought they were eating, and probably fewer than 100 real medical case reports.
I've had cases where even the expert mycologist can't identify the mushroom, even with all these great pictures. So how many case reports are actually about the mushroom that they're reporting, or how many patients claim that they ate a true Morel? It's actually a false Morel. Even having experts try to identify some of these is challenging for them.
Right? And it kind of raises an epistemic question for me. Do you know that word, Matt?
No.
It basically means, how confident are we in the knowledge that we have? And when it comes to mushroom poisoning, most of what we know comes from cases where we think someone ate that mushroom. There's almost never DNA or toxin confirmation, and often not even a photo, so we don't really know what was eaten. It creates real confusion about what's actually poisonous. For example, as I was looking into this, I found another mushroom that mirrors the questions we have about the Morel. Something eaten for centuries that suddenly started killing people.
You found another mushroom that's just suddenly killing people that we thought was edible.
It's called the yellow knight.
That sounds familiar.
It was a delicacy in France for millennia, until a case series published in the New England Journal of Medicine in the early 2000s showed these yellow knight mushrooms killed 3 people and sickened about 12, causing all their muscle cells to break down.
I would love to hear an explanation on how the yellow knight has suddenly started killing people.
Well, a lot of people argued that it actually wasn't the yellow knight at all that caused those deaths. Maybe it was a misidentified poisonous mushroom that got labeled the yellow knight.
Oh, interesting. There's just a lot of conflicting data.
Yeah, conflicting, like how we never thought Morels could kill people. This could explain the Bozeman outbreak too, if a false Morel accidentally got mislabeled as a Morel. And mix-ups seem to happen all the time. Not only do I not think we can rule out the false Morel, but I'm actually starting to wonder if some of these deaths from false Morels could have been Morels the whole time. Do you think we can really say it's neither of these?
Giving me a lot of things to think about.
Came away from that conversation with a much more open mind, but a lot less certainty. I still have no idea if this is a poison in the mushroom or something that got added to it. I brought this all back to Dr. Bassett to get his take.
I mean, obviously, a bunch of really, really smart people have adjudicated this case, but the absence of sort of proof positive, a Morel toxin that's never been identified before, or a different species of Morel that has kind of biologically plausible deleterious effects, begs me as the scientist, look through a skeptical eye. This is something that's plagued the toxicology community since existence, is that historically we used to publish all the time on associations. There was a reported story of an exposure to this and this outcome, but no levels were checked, no objective data was evaluated. And I think we recognize there's a responsibility in the scientific community to be as objective and transparent when it comes to people looking through our interpretation of the evidence. The scientist in me wants to reject the null hypothesis. Is there something else?
That's a great point. Like, is this an association or is this something else?
The other thing about mushrooms, depending where they're found, you have to think about, chemicals being sprayed on them too, maybe in a schoolyard or on lawns. So it's not just the mushroom in and of itself, it's some human interaction with them that might explain some possible symptoms.
We don't even know if we're dealing with toxicity from a mushroom or some man-made chemical. And that's the real question. Is this a solid link? Could it be the Morel? Or was there something else clinging to it? A false Morel poison cooked into the batch, or a contaminant we never tested for? Because so far every test has come up empty. Yet somehow an official report did land on the Morel mushroom as the definitive culprit in this outbreak.
So over the years, our group at CDC has investigated disease outbreak covering a wide variety of topics.
And in the next episode, we are going to hear from the people who helped make that call, the CDC investigators. We'll hear how they approached this outbreak, what other poisons they were able to rule out, and whether the Morel really holds up.
Every time we had a call, there would be someone who would raise their hand and say, "Are you sure these were Morels and not false Morels?"
That's next time on A Morel Dilemma. If you are finding anything in this series valuable, the best way to support the show is simple. Leave a rating, write a review, and share it with someone who should hear it. This project is completely independent. No funding, no sponsors, no institutions. Just an effort to help people understand how poisoning outbreaks are identified, investigated, and hopefully prevented. If you'd like to support the show more directly, there are 3 things you can do. Head to thepoisonlab.com/support to get access to all episodes early and ad-free, or check out our educational projects like Poisonous Fungus Among Us and the Gotta Pick'em card game. Links are in the show notes. Either way, thanks for being here and for helping share this story. Because this won't be the last outbreak, but maybe together we can recognize the next one sooner. This show is written and produced by me, Ryan Feldman. Music is from Pixabay, featuring artists Vera Miller, Driver Silver, Lexan Music, and Rocco Garibaldi. Audio production and sound design by Max McClellan, MKM Audio. This show is a production of Clinical Toxicology, LLC.
6 people are now dead.
Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food.
And state health officials are now working with federal agencies to find